everyone. I'm Kevin Blevins, and I'd like to welcome you to another episode of the Siemens Startup Podcast Series, where we speak with entrepreneurs to gain insight on how they turn their innovative dreams into successful companies. One of the exciting parts of working with startup companies is working with founders who start with an idea, gather a group of like-minded, passionate individuals, and then make the idea come true. It's amazing and exciting to watch them along this path to maturity. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome back to our show Alexey Matsushev, co-founder and CEO of Nautilus. Alexey has participated in an earlier Siemens Startup podcast posted back in January of 2021, and we've invited him back to discuss all the exciting changes that have occurred at Nautilus over the last 2 years. In the life of a startup company, 2 years can be a lifetime. Just a quick reminder, Nautilus is an innovative company producing a fleet of efficient, cost-efficient, autonomous cargo aircraft. They are, in essence, reinventing the global air freight business. I'm very excited to be having this conversation with Alexey today. So, Alexey, it's nice to talk to you again, and I very much appreciate you taking the time to join us. And a little background on Alexey. He has over 12 years of experience with aircraft performance and has played a lead role in aerodynamics in 5 different aircraft platforms. He has a deep knowledge of low-cost manufacturing, airframe design, stress analysis, and systems design. Alexey also has prior experience with high-tech entrepreneurial startup ventures in the aerospace and mobile business sectors. He has indeed created a number of companies.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Kevin. Excited to have the conversation.
It's our pleasure. Alexey, I'd like to start with, we previously learned about your background as an aerospace dynamics student and how a number of the jobs that you took led you to create other companies and eventually Nautilus. Do you think the entrepreneurial spirit is ingrained in you?
Yeah, I definitely think so. And I think a large part of it has to do with the fact of me being an immigrant. I'm first generation here, immigrated from Ukraine over to the United States in 1996. My father was an engineer in Ukraine and an entrepreneur himself. He actually worked for Siemens back in the day, doing software development and oil and pipe stuff there for the Soviet market sector. And unfortunately, back in those days, engineers were not making quite a bit of money in those types of positions. So my father started a side hustle. We were actually based in Odessa, which is on the Black Sea port there. And so as the Soviet Union was opening up borders, he was one of the first folks that kind of figured out if you can actually go across the pond there to Istanbul and buy a lot of the goods that were not previously available in the Soviet market. So we're talking BMW keychains, knockoffs, of course, not the real thing, Tetris machines, knockoff Lego sets, and things like that. He spent the little cash that we had as a family, and he started bringing all these goods over. He would sell them on the local street bazaars over and around Odessa. And it actually started to get quite successful. And he kind of roped in my family. My aunt started working for the business. Then my mother started working for the business. Both of my grandparents started working for the business. And so my father still had a day job at that time, but the business was kind of locally family run over there. We could actually afford certain, life luxuries such as a washing machine, a color TV, television, and things like that. So as a young boy growing up over there, I could definitely see the growth of what entrepreneurship could really do to elevate, especially our lives during those days in making that happen. So obviously, long story short, I felt it definitely has been ingrained through those experiences within me. As I kind of moved my way into the aerospace industry here in the United States, there's always the back of my mind is like, what could be done better? Is there a side hustle that maybe might turn into a business that will elevate, my life or my family's lives and things like that, but also in a meaningful way change the world? I think looking back on the trinkets that my father created is they were great for what they were at that time, but I'm definitely a little bit different where I believe in big ideas and changing industries. And that's kind of where my passion has lied over the last decade or so.
I think this is just such an inspiring story. Do you think your upbringing has impacted or inspired how you lead at Nautilus today?
I think a little bit of it. My co-founder, he's actually from Russia. So it's kind of an interesting dynamic given the war, but we're like brothers. So the politics have no play in it whatsoever. And so not getting into the war, but that immigrant type of mentality seeps its way into Nautilus for sure. We're definitely scrappy. So a lot of the times, the components that we buy to build airplanes come from Home Depot, Lowe's, things like that. Not really the traditional places you might think about when you actually are building and designing airplanes. But a lot of those things are actually just as good as aerospace hardware in certain places. So we're building airplanes more like boats and cars instead of the way that the industry traditionally builds them. And I think a lot of that has to do with the scrappiness that kind of came from that world.
When you joined us last, it was in January of 2021. The country, or the world for that matter, was still in the throes of the COVID pandemic and opened later in May of 2021, I believe it was. Now that you've had time to reflect on those times, did the pandemic impact Nautilus? And if so, how?
It felt like, especially being in San Francisco at the time, we're in San Diego, and we can spend a little bit of time about that move. But it was very eye-opening to see, because we were about to head off on a fundraise at that time. And we thought at the early stage of the pandemic, it's going to be a month or two, maybe three, but not, this whole length of experience, especially with something that was unknown. I remember in the middle of the fundraise, I think at month 1.5 or something like that, or when San Francisco was one of the first cities to shut down. But all of the CEOs started to get all these emails from not only our investors, but just the entire ecosystem. It's like, plan for the long haul, focus on profitability, make cuts where you can. I mean, we were, as CEOs and founders, instructed to cut all the fat, stop growth, and just focus on the core business. And I think that had a profound kind of effect through the startup ecosystem. A lot of folks during that time also, I mean, the running joke is you couldn't get a U-Haul in San Francisco. Everybody was trying to get the heck out of town because they were losing jobs, and as well as, people were just hunkering down. So we were definitely affected by it, I would say. But at the same time, we saw a huge growth spur. So things like Uber Eats, Instacart, of course, Amazon, they exploded. They couldn't get enough people. So we had this kind of dichotomy playing in San Francisco, but certain businesses were just brutally successful and, of course, fueled growth. But at the same time, a lot of the hard tech businesses, there was just no capital available for them. And people were, if you had the cash at that time, it was a really great opportunity to get some really great talent. But during our time in the middle of a fundraise, we really hunkered down, focused on the core products. We actually went back a step and used the opportunity and the time to really finesse the design, because we knew once we hit got out of the pandemic that we could hit the ground running and, get through the last pieces of the design effort, really start on the manufacturing side. But it was an unknown. It was a very scary time to be a business dependent on venture capital that is not in revenue yet.
I can imagine. And you mentioned capital. And every time we talk, I learn something new about the funding and what goes on in that. And this goes beyond just the whole idea of limited partners funding VCs and VCs funding startup companies, right? I guess this is a great time to ask, how has the recent Silicon Valley collapse impacted funding in general? Not necessarily your funding, but funding of startup companies.
The Silicon Valley Bank is a chain of events that's been kind of evolving over the last year and a half, that's been fundamentally changing the entire ecosystem. To give you an example, the pandemic lasted a year and a half, something like that, depending on how you want to look at it. And so after coming off the pandemic, the world was open for business. A lot of dry powder existed within all these venture capital firms because we were coming off a really big high entering into the pandemic. And so all this dry powder needed to be released, and it got released really, really quickly. So coming in towards the end of 2022, valuations were skyrocketing. It was very easy to get capital. And then in 2023, we had, the FTX collapse, the crypto markets. And then the third event that happened was the Silicon Valley Bank collapse. So not only were the markets shrinking at one instance, but also it kind of signaled to the world that even the money that was existing or held in these banks was not even safe. Silicon Valley Bank is the premier fund, whereas premier banking institution for a lot of these startups. And so it happened so quick too. It was Wednesday evening, there was just a smell of something being off. But Thursday morning, we all literally woke up with all these emails from our investors, pull out the money, and then it was a bank run, right? It's hard to say that nobody was affected. We had a minimal kind of effect by it. We held cash at Silicon Valley Bank, but it wasn't in the amounts that we usually do. So not that we kind of saw the writing on the wall. It's just, honestly, we got lucky.
So from that perspective, were you able to get all of your money? Because I think there are people who think that there are an awful lot of people who are not getting their money or didn't get their money. Can you confirm that you did?
Yeah, so we were able to get some of it out. And I mean, obviously the feds are guaranteeing all of it, but it's still going to be an ongoing process. But, I think the worst time, it was a Wednesday, Thursday, Friday situation. And then the second thing is it was a payroll cycle. Not a lot of people realize it, but it was one of those, it was week 2 or something like that. It felt like in the month. I had to stand up in front of my employees that week and be like, look, guys, our bank just collapsed. I'm not going to be able to pay you on Monday. All of the CEOs had to have those really tough conversations. And of course, the next question is like, when are we going to get paid? And the answer was like, I have no idea. So it was one of those really tough times, I guess, in the cycles of a startup where it feels like external forces, not relating to the way you run the company or your products, work there. So definitely one of the lows, I would say.
You talked about the economy as a whole and the number of things that impacted the Silicon Valley, right? How does inflation impact you as a startup company?
I'm not an economist, but I can tell you the broad level scope. Obviously, with inflation rates being so high, it feels like the limited partners, a lot of our investors are not committing quite a bit of capital into the startup sector. We're going to see a huge shrinking in the market. So coming off of a large dry powder run, we've seen a lot of things happen over the last 6 to 8 months where a lot of investors are focusing on profitable companies first, the companies that are able to weather these types of cycles, specifically because they can optimize on the revenue and still be able to perform. The valuations obviously have come down. Hard tech has kind of taken a step back, I would say. Investors are more weary of investing into very capital intensive businesses. They're typically also looking for something that we call dual use technology. So with the interest rates being so high, just in case something goes wrong, they want another contract or another application of this type of technology. And they're specifically looking at the United States Armed Forces to kind of help propel the company. So I think a lot of the folks, specifically in the aerospace, aviation, cybersecurity type of landscapes, have really started to focus on the government as a customer during these times. From our perspective, too, what's interesting is being in the aviation sector is there's a lot of dry powder that is stuck in these airlines. So when the airlines were really affected by the pandemic, the government actually stepped in and helped keep a lot of them afloat. And so all this cash is still stockpiled in a lot of our customers. And so it's actually a really good time for us to do business on that level as well. On a macro level, although it's complex, but bottom line is the markets are shrinking. I've had a founder actually this morning that just literally said, I don't want to do another fundraise. I'm going to try to go sell the company. I think we're going to see more and more of that type of stuff.
You've used the phrase dry powder a couple of times, but it's a phrase I've never heard. What is that?
So dry powder is, a jargon we would use in Silicon Valley, where if a lot of the investors coming into the pandemic, there was really great market opportunities and things like that. A lot of folks were not seeing a lot of the great opportunities, limited partners in the public markets. And so they were looking to venture capital to really push the needle on creating returns. And so we saw a record break years actually, or funds raised by venture capitalists, billions of dollars in a fund, maybe 1.5 billion. Andreessen Horowitz, I think they raised 3 funds over $1 billion. And so all that money is now sitting there ready to be deployed. And so we call that the dry powder. Essentially, it's available somewhere on the side, still to be invested, but it hasn't been deployed yet.
Now, that makes sense to me. Is there a group of entrepreneurs that are more likely to get funded than others today? Let's say the early stage startup companies versus well-established. And if so, why?
That's actually a really good point. What we've seen right now is kind of a trough forming around the company. So right now even though the markets are cooling off for later stage, the larger check sizes, the earlier stage is actually a pretty good time to start a company right now in the pre-seed and seed level. Once you get to the Series A, it feels like there's more requirements or the goalposts are been moved a little bit farther to the right. So the Series A companies are having a little bit of a harder time, as well as the Bs and the Cs. But the early stage stuff, typically between 500 and 300K check sizes, we're still seeing a renewed interest in that. And the reason is most of the better companies are usually found during down cycles. So the Airbnbs, the Ubers, and things like that. And I think investors really understand that. The entrepreneurs have to be more scrappy. The metrics that they have to show to investors are better. So you're actually going to be seeing a better cohort of companies come out this year in the earlier stages. So I think that opportunity cycle is really pushing investors on the earlier side of things.
Interesting. Without talking specifics, what series of funding is Nautilus at?
We're in the growth stage, I would say. We found our product market fit as a company. Specifically, we have a $7 billion order book, over 460 plus airplanes, which is very exciting. And so we're kind of in the build the product, get it to market stage, and then really hit the gas pedal on cash to get it to a scaling experience.
There's a question I was planning to ask later, but when you talk about an order book or pre-orders, does Nautilus take pre-orders, or is that what that order book is?
It could be called pre-orders. The way that we refer to them is, letters of intent or MOUs. It depends on the industry where the validity or the weight that those documents really carry. So in a software experience where you're selling, let's say, to a B2B business, maybe it's a 5,000 to 7,000 per year order or something like that. Those are given away like candy quite a bit. So they don't have a lot of weight. But the moment you move into a sector, let's just say like an aviation sector where you're dealing with strategic partners and airlines, they carry a lot of weight. So a lot of our documents follow the format of some of our competitors, which are, the Boeings and the Airbuses of the world, and they carry a lot of weight. So I think even when we say the word pre-order, it does vary quite a bit.
What's the value of this to Nautilus?
When you start thinking about a hard tech company, specifically in the aviation sector, where the market, the way that you're going to reach the market it's going to take you a long time. It's not going to be, next year, the way a software, or 6 months from now, the way a software business would work. Is the investors need that warm, fuzzy feeling that the product that you have has already found product market fit. It can't be with, the small airlines. It has to be with the large airlines as well. So typically, you're talking to the vice president or CEO level, and these CEOs are committing to buying your product in the future once it actually hits market. And so it's the chicken and the egg problem. Then you take those MOUs or letters of intent, you bring them to investors and say, look, these are the specs of the product. This is the team to go build it. Now I need a little bit more money than a traditional software startup to go out and actually execute on this vision to get to market.
I'm going to take you back to funding. I realize that one of the many things that your team spends time on is funding, but you do so many other things. How much time do you think the average startup company spends thinking about and obtaining funding?
I mean, if you're in a good place, meaning the markets are, really attuned to what you're doing right now, if you are already found product market fit, you're in revenue, and you're just essentially on the up curve, the hockey stick side of things, it can be between a month and 1 to 3 months, essentially as a cycle. Average right now in the industry is 6 months. So from the time that you say that you're going to start raising to the time actually the money's in the bank, that'll be like a seed or a Series A or BC, is about 6 months average. Obviously, as you start to get into that cycle too, certain things like market forces might happen. And so that might prolong the fundraise. But people really think that it takes like a week or so to raise money. That's not the case. It's definitely a very strategic process. And it really starts out with, it's like a sales funnel. But you have to talk to about 150 VCs total to really be able to get to the numbers and the market kind of to really close up around. It's not 3 VCs or 5 VCs. I mean, we hear stories, Mark Zuckerberg talked to Peter Thiel, and then all of a sudden a $750,000 check got written. But I'm sure there was a little bit more behind on the back curve there, where a lot of work was done to make sure that the right VCs were spoken to, and the number of VCs that were also communicated that deal to. But it's a substantial amount of time. And on top of that, it's usually the CEO is literally in charge of the fundraising process. So the moment I say that I'm going to go out and raise money, that means I'm wildly disconnected from the team and wildly disconnected from the customers. And so the answer usually as a startup is, you want to get this done as quickly as possible. So you can go back there and, create those directions and that vision and make sure that you're actually meeting the milestones.
I don't think the average individual who talks about or hears about startup companies realizes that the impact or the dedication you have to give to things like that. And I always learn something new when we talk about funding. Now I know what dry powder is. If we talk a bit about the company, though, just so we frame the rest of the conversation, Nautilus is developing a fleet of autonomous cargo aircraft. Why cargo aircraft?
The reason why we started the company is kind of a book called 0 to 1, which was written by Peter Thiel, and then he had a co-founder too, which escapes my brain right now. But the kind of talked about creating a business as a monopoly, especially when you go after these big, audacious ideas. And so what you're really looking for is markets that really did not see a lot of innovation over the long term or new players entering. And there's a couple of moats that you can create where these markets have created around themselves. And so specifically, if you look at the aircraft market as a whole, Boeing and Airbus and other players will tell you that it takes billions of dollars to certify airplanes. And so what the market really has is this whole capital moat around it, right? So you need lots of capital to enter it. But then you also, want to kind of enter the market in a place where there's not a lot of focus on, where the innovation has kind of been really, really the worst. So, I mean, Boeing and Airbus specifically are in the business of building passenger airplanes first, and whatever falls out is the freighter. And so they really left the freighter side of the business kind of untouched and really not focused on. Whereas we saw this huge rise in e-commerce too. So investors always ask you the question like, well, why now? Well, why now is the answer that Amazon and other e-commerce players have been starting to drive air freight in a new way. And Boeing and Airbus, have not really adapted to changing their aircraft designs for this new market segment. So it's leaving up this huge opportunity on the table for a new player to come in and enter it. And so that's how we kind of approached the market. The market was $280 billion. Investors always ask you about total addressable market. So it kind of gave us a really nice space to play in, where you have these two big entrants that are completely not focused on this market, and allows somebody like a Nautilus to come in and really have a good opportunity in grabbing 20% or 30% market share.
And you mentioned the certification and the billions of dollars that a Boeing or someone would spend on developing an aircraft. How do these regulations impact you at Nautilus?
It's really interesting. I think I haven't done this yet, but I'm pretty sure that this trend exists because we talk about it all the time. But first flight of an airplane was 1913. It's been over 100 years. And then as soon as we started to have accidents in aviation, the rulemaking kept getting more stringent and stringent and stringent, right? And it's basically to guard against or create safety levels within the industry. But as those safety levels and those regulations were written, the cost to certify those airplanes started to get more expensive, more expensive, more expensive. And so I think where we end up right now is a rule book that in a lot of ways, in some ways, doesn't make a lot of sense given the current environment, the way that the customers are approaching these aircraft and things like that. So what happened in the industry is they've actually in the smaller airplane world to create more innovation like the electrification, autonomy, and new concepts like vertical takeoff. They actually rewrote the entire book and essentially said, those 10,000 pages that we had for you before, we actually reduced that down to 20 pages. And so now as a company, you actually approach us and how you want to certify the airplanes. But to answer your question, is regulations play a huge driving force in the amount of capital it takes to certify a system. The larger airplanes, specifically the passenger class, are still, especially with the recent events with the Boeing MAX program, is there's, more scrutiny about those regulations and why they were not able to guard things instead of the opposite of what we see in the general aviation world. Those regulations are very interesting. And on top of that, you can go to a different country too, like in New Zealand, and certify there really quickly and then move the regulations over to the United States. So a lot of ways to skin the cat. Have to be clever, have to have the right team to really be able to move the needle on that.
So let's talk a little bit about the changes over the last couple of years. How many employees do you have today?
So we have 23, probably grow up to about 40 by the end of this year and early next year.
So you'll double from now and almost triple from where you were 2 years ago. So working with larger companies, you have a number of counterparts out there in the Boeings and things of that sort. You mentioned you have orders from one of these companies, right? How do you work with those companies?
There's really two sides because we want to play within the ecosystem. We understand that there's a lot of foundation that has already been laid out. So we want to be able to utilize those pieces. So as an example, with our suppliers, we're partnering with Pratt & Whitney, of course, Siemens, which is a really exciting partnership, Collins Aerospace for the cargo loading system. But I think for them, it's the first time they've ever worked with a startup. And so a lot of questions need to be answered. Specifically, we do almost exactly the same pitch to these larger corporations that you would do to an investor, really to bring him in on the vision, understand what the order book looks like, what the market opportunities look like. I mean, if Boeing approached one of them, there would be no questions asked. Like, we know exactly where this is going and we understand Boeing. But with a startup, it's more difficult. It would take us maybe 6 to 8 months to sign up a tier one supplier in a lot of ways. And it's really a lot of education. But once you get them in and they see the opportunity, believe in the vision, I think it really creates a strong fundamental partnership because especially in the sector that we're playing, the opportunity is so large and nothing is really innovative has been done. On the other side of the piece of the puzzle is the airlines, right? The airlines are also, I think they're more innovative or more forward thinking than one might expect because for their business, they live and die on profit margins, and they're so small and that any leg up in the technology side of things really gives them a fundamental market opportunity. So that's why we've seen folks like United Airlines, American, working with different types of customers or startups, not the Boeings or the Airbuses of the world, is because they know that they can fundamentally change their business behind it. And I think it really starts from the top. We usually talk with, C-level executives. We really spend a lot of time planning out and network planning how these products might fit in, modeling out financially what this might look like. But at the end of the day, I think they're really starting to turn around. I mean, CO2 efficiency, all those things are becoming more and more sustainability conversation with them. How can you move goods, opening up new markets and then still moving them in a more economic and then sustainable manner is pretty much the three big trends. And so if you can hit the nail on two out of the three, I think you have a really good opportunity to work with some of these forward-thinking airlines.
That's interesting. You mentioned working with suppliers like Pratt & Whitney. Does working with a company like that reduce the amount of time or effort you have to put into certification of the aircraft?
The thinking is the airplanes are always certified almost as a system. And what the FAA is really looking for is that the individual pieces have already gone through certification. If I say I'm using a Pratt & Whitney engine, they're like, well, we understand that. That's already been certified. That's flown millions of hours, I believe. So you want to keep the technology risk with the FAA to a minimum. And so utilizing all these players that already have certified products on the market is really the key to getting to market quickly. So without a doubt, yes.
That's awesome. During the previous interview, you couldn't talk about your customers. Are you able to share anything about your customers now?
Obviously, there's certain ones that we can't talk about still, but we just recently sold about 20 of our smaller Kona feeder airplanes in a deal worth about $134 million to Ameriflight. So they're the largest operator for feeder operations into folks like UPS and FedEx here in the United States. They also do work in the Caribbean and a little bit into Mexico. It's a very exciting partnership. They're, I would say, like one of the tier one, I would say, customers that we've been talking to for a long time. They have a very forward-looking and visionary CEO right now, which has been just such a pleasure to work with. And at the same time, it's kind of hit an interesting time in their business too, which it's, a lot of their airplanes are older. It's time to find new platforms. And then they have this fundamental challenge with the pilots. So Nautilus kind of checks the box on a couple of those opportunities. And so being also the market leader in the space, they really are hanging their hat on our products, which is fantastic. And of course, that gives us a little bit more credibility with the announcement and of course, other customers that haven't announced yet. But essentially, I would say we're able to level up into a different tier of customers after that.
Oh, that's great. And you mentioned the fundamental problem with pilots. What is that fundamental problem?
Being a pilot is not as sexy as it used to be. I have a couple of friends that are pilots. I just graduated at Embry-Riddle, which is a huge pilot training school. But it's a hard industry to get into. It's a lot of debt to even get a pilot's license. I mean, an average pilot will graduate with $120,000, $150,000 worth of debt. The starting salaries could be my friends were starting out at $35,000 a year with all those student loans. And obviously, as they get closer toward the end of their career, they're making, captain and whatnot, and $250,000 or even more makes sense. But it's not the best way to start a career, I would say. And so as passenger traffic is growing, we see the cargo sector is booming because of e-commerce. So demand is going up, but the supply has remained the same or been shrinking. And so everybody, I think, especially on the feeder side of things, like Ameriflight level, has been really trying to figure out how do you crack this problem with the pilots entering the workforce, where utilizing them to more capacity, which of course is labor laws and things like that tied to it, crew rest. So technology feels to be like the one fundamental solution that everybody can get rally behind around in solving this problem.
You mentioned earlier the move from San Francisco to San Diego. Can you talk about that? What made you move?
It was a very difficult decision, really believing that this is going to be the place where the company will be, first of all, successful, and then also allow us to grow. I think one of the things that we were really starting to figure out in the Bay Area right before the pandemic was that we're going up against some very well-funded players, like the eVTOL taxi world, like the Jobies and the Archers, that were a little bit farther ahead than us. And so they would be bringing in a lot of the aviation and aerospace talent into the Bay Area, or if we were able to bring them in, a lot of our folks would get poached. And the salaries that they were paying were just not in the realm of salaries that we were able to offer given our stage. So that, along with complexities within the aerospace in the Bay Area, we have 3 really major airports and then all tied in a very small area. Testing something, with our ambitions and our scale, it just didn't seem to make a lot of sense. And then kind of like the third thing was we were under the jurisdiction of the Seattle Aircraft Certification Office, which had a lot of problems with the Boeing situation going on at that time. And so we wanted to get away from that jurisdiction and focus on a smaller office, which had more understanding of what we were trying to do. And ironically enough, the Los Angeles Aircraft Certification Office is the one who's in charge of large unmanned certification here. So moving to Southern California almost made a lot of sense because we would switch the jurisdiction of the office. We would also be able to grow a little bit quicker because we'll be poaching from folks like Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, General Atomics, which are right up the street from us. And then kind of also lower cost of operation, although be it still California, kind of all of it created its way into a decision to move down.
I would have never thought about the certification jurisdiction being a key reason for you to move, but it makes all the sense in the world today. And like you said, the established companies exist down in Southern California, where the startup companies exist in Northern, related to some of the aerospace side of the house. I suspect you were able to find people down in Southern California who were interested in joining a startup company and leaving one of those big companies.
Just to add on to that, was really interesting too, coming in from the Bay Area over to the Southern California, a lot of employees were not exposed to startups. And so things like equity is part of the package, runway, all these fundamental things that seem so natural up in the Bay Area when you hire someone, just a lot of re-education had to happen and really honing in on, what is the value proposition compared to, let's say, going to a Northrop or General Atomics. And so we had an easier time getting folks, but at the same time, we also had to do, a better job in convincing them that the upside in a startup is worth the risk, I would say.
I think back in my career, and there was a time whenever I actually took less income to move into an industry that I felt would better my life from a longer term perspective, or someone convinced me it would make more sense, right? So that's interesting. Has Nautilus's physical footprint changed since 2021?
Right before the pandemic, we kind of shrunk our facilities down because we were more in a design phase of the airplane. So we took away a lot of our manufacturing facilities and kind of, again, when the pandemic happened, we just focused on more of the CAD work and things like that and the design, as I mentioned. After the pandemic, we were in a good position where we were ready to scale up really quickly. So coming into San Diego, we grabbed 2 office facilities right downtown for an engineering space, and then also a 12,000 square foot facility out of Brownfield. Kind of split the company into 2, but at the same time, I think set us up in a really good place for growth in manufacturing and really getting to the next stage of the company.
And again, I think that move from Northern California to Southern California is not a bad move from a weather perspective either, right? So you're building a prototype today, yet Nautilus is a pretty small company. How can you accomplish this?
I've been always asked that question by investors. They think, the moment you say airplane, you need 100 folks or something like that. But a lot of the, experiences that I had later in my career has been specifically about smaller teams, not tripping over each other, given a lot of responsibility and decision-making power to really run through programs. And not in the same way that I would say that like Boeing would never be able to do something like that. Skunkworks has kind of been brought up in that ecosystem. Things have obviously changed as they started to grow and scale up, but it's just a different mindset. So, when I mentioned like 40 folks by the end of this year, early next year, that'll be enough to build this whole full-scale prototype. And a lot of the decisions that we make is, of course, giving responsibility to engineers. We just finished 2 vertical tails, which are about 12 foot in height, which is pretty fantastic. The amount of engineers that worked on that were 3. And that was all the way from the design all the way through actually manufacturing it. So the co-founder was actually building this vertical tail as we were getting the design finished up, which is pretty cool. And then as we scale up into the bigger stages, we really look for tier 1 partners. As an example, we're partnered with Janicki out of Seattle. We were just recently over there, but they do really large carbon fiber pieces. They do a lot of work for eVTOL. Those folks are like a machine. You give them a work package, it's going to get done on time, and it's also going to be done on budget. And so really pushing off to key suppliers and entrusting into them is one of the keys that we really learned from our earlier lives in the industry. And so when it actually comes down to do final assembly in the hangar, you don't need 150 engineers, or technicians. You really need a small team of 40 to really get everything done before first flight. And on top of that, once you have a department of 10, as an example, people start to trip over each other. The tasking starts to get a little bit more managed, I would say. And so it feels that folks are not utilized to their capacity. So I think there's a lot of efficiencies for the right time and stage of a program. And especially if you have a team and leadership that really know how to work the team in that way, I think it really could create a lot of success.
And this has likely been a great learning experience for those people who have joined you from other aircraft companies, where they're not only designing and engineering something, but getting the hands-on of actually being able to build it.
Yeah, absolutely. We were just talking this morning with another engineer. As part of our release package, we really don't have manufacturing drawings to go out on the floor. All we have is a CAD model and then also the manufacturing instructions. So a lot of those inefficiencies where an engineer needs to spend like a month generating these drawings just don't exist. And so that communication between the two folks, the manufacturer and then also the engineer in charge it's crazy to think how quickly you can move with all that.
Yeah, it's amazing. You started with the desire to build an aircraft and then build a full-scale prototype. Have your plans changed, and are there additional aircrafts that you're planning to add to the suite of products that you have available?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we have 3 products to date. I mean, we're laser focused on the first full-scale, what we call the Kona. It's a 19,000-pound, 85-foot wingspan feeder airplane. And so we recently just completed a scaled flight of that aircraft that's been announced, I think, last week, which is fantastic. We did a quarter scale model there and essentially validated 3 years of wind tunnel testing that really went into this innovative configuration. So that was a huge milestone that we're still reaping the rewards of just this past week with investors and customers. Everybody's just got really excited. But within those 3 products, we do see opportunities, something smaller than a Kona as an example, and something in between the Kona and the 60-ton freighter, so something in the 20, 30-ton payload category. But although the product will fit really well inside of those market segments, the problem is that market forces are at play. So as an example, the 30-ton payload category is 737 lookalikes, and there's a lot of feedstock coming off from these older 737s that could be converted. And like you can buy a 737 for $2 to $3 million, convert it to a freighter for another 6 or 7. And so $11 to $15 million out the door, you have a dedicated freighter that's been given new life. And so with new airplane programs, especially that you're amortizing the cost of development, when you're competing against these older airframes that everybody's gobbling up right now, it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. So I think there is opportunities within the market segments, but it's just we're shying away and looking at the macro level and understanding how we actually stack up against those older products and what is going on.
You're developing that, or you're actually building the prototype now. When do you expect to fly that prototype?
We're expecting it to fly in about 24 months. We're well on track on that. There's been certain challenges specifically with supply chain issues that, even though that's the problem that we're trying to solve as a company, but we're becoming predators of it ourselves. So things like carbon fiber are a little bit slower, honeycomb materials, things like that, avionics, engines have really long lead times as well. So those are the types of challenges that we're trying to solve because the company still continues to burn monthly rates for engineering salaries. And if we're twiddling our thumbs for a month, it's a problem.
Well, that's interesting because 2 years ago, you mentioned that supply chain was your number one issue. Do you have additional key challenges that you're dealing with today that are different than 2 years ago?
I think it's the same problem. It's just, I don't think any of us really understood how much time it will take for this supply chain issue to recover or the supply chains to recover. And then on top of that, the addition of the war, obviously, in Ukraine has been also a huge catalyst for that. And then geopolitical relationships between, of course, the East and the West with the China thing. Those all continue to play in the larger supply chain issue. And I think that's the part that I think we started to see a recovery and then the war and then, more political issues started to come in effect. As a startup, a hard tech startup building airplanes, you never really think about that stuff, but then it hits you like a rock sometimes. And, we never saw this coming. And so obviously it comes with experience. We're learning to be better looking, around corners and trying to expect certain things as we try to solve those supply chain issues for ourselves.
You mentioned the suppliers in the Far East. Are you caught up in one of the same issues that the automobile industry was caught up in related to chips and things of that sort?
Yeah, so a lot of those chips make their way into avionics, of course. And so avionics are typically 6 to 12-month lead times. Even flight control actuators have, avionics or chipsets inside of them. So it's exactly the same problem all across the board. Never saw that one coming, I would say.
What other changes has Nautilus experienced over the last 2 years?
Just on the company building side, it's been interesting to kind of hit the 20 individual mark. And there's certain things that, as a founder, you always think that are, I'm not going to say are not that important. Things like having HR folks and things like that, and finance folks on the team. You just think like, well, all we need is about 40 engineers, and then we'll all just figure it out, and then it'll magically just work itself out. But as you kind of hit the 20 individual mark, I think it became really interesting to watch. That we do have to, create those, I would say, layers within the company, like HR, dedicated HR. Maybe we need a dedicated IT individual now, and because the CEO and the founder cannot be fixing every single computer every day. Stuff like that is becoming really interesting. So also hitting that growth stage of the company as well.
Yeah, it has to be hard putting on your HR hat and then taking that off and putting your CEO hat on and going to do the funding. And that's pretty tough when you have to shift gears like that.
Yeah, I think it's also great though, because wearing so many hats, when it's the time to hire those individuals, you kind of feel that you've already kind of lived what their job is going to look like. So you can understand, I think, a little bit easier of what does the personality need to be, what is the qualifications need to be. And so I think it does help in the end, but in the short term, once you're going through those growing pains, it's difficult.
That's a great point. What about you personally? What has changed for you over this time frame?
Definitely grown by leaps and bounds. I think this is the hardest thing for me, especially coming in from an engineering background, was literally to take my engineering hat off and just put it away, very far away, and really looking at problems and customers objectively through the lens of a business development question or a marketing question, things like that. The very early stages of the company, we really didn't believe quite a bit in marketing. We thought, the products would sell themselves because just they were engineered in such a great way that you'd be silly not to purchase them. But at the same time, as you get a little bit into the larger stages of the company, telling that story not only to customers, but then thinking it through suppliers, thinking it through investors, it's a whole different skill set that, even though I had before, it didn't seem as important as it is now. And so this is fascinating too when you think about Silicon Valley. Typically, the best teams seem to be like a business-minded CEO, and then a CTO who is just all he thinks about is about technology, right? There's a reason why those teams work really well. It's just two very different hats. But as a kind of a dual use CEO, where I'm wearing the business and the marketing as well as the engineering hats, just learning when to take that hat off and just put it far away, not even think about what this might look like from an engineering perspective. So that's been a very interesting growth experience for me.
So what are the key marketing activities that you participate in these days?
We recently did this huge video of the scale flight of our quarter scale airplane that I mentioned, the Kona. And so that took a lot of orchestration, and I have a wonderful team that helps me out with that. But just, getting out into the desert, making sure that the engineers understand exactly what this prototype might need to look like, the paint job on it, where the logos go, the small details that an engineer would not be typically concerned with. Oh, there's a little bit of waviness here because the photo, once the light bounces off, it's going to create this wrinkle or something like that. All those are important. Or like the size of the gear might be a little bit too large or too small or things like that. So it's the little details that really help tell the story from the beginning to end. And as well as, just making sure that everybody kind of is succinct with the vision and all that good stuff. And not only internal to the company, but also external as well. And then on the business development side is making sure that the customer requirements are flowing in. They get dissected by the engineering brain, but then they're also communicated like, this is important, this is not important for, let's say, first flight for the prototype, or, for production, that this is important. So understanding where priorities lie. As an example, we were recently talking about for the full scale prototype, it's made out of carbon fiber and aluminum. Are we going to paint the airplane for first flight? The engineering side of me is like, well, heck no, we're only going to add, a month's worth of
why bother?
Time to paint. Yeah, why bother with it? And we're going to add weight to it. What's the point? But then the whole idea behind why are we doing this first flight is to show off the airplane to our customers, our investors and partners. And so, yes, of course it has to be painted, and yes, it has to look cool, and all this stuff that, yeah, it's an interesting brain, I guess, twist of how to think about those two things.
I was looking at your website and I happened to notice that you had an image of your plane, and on the side of it, you had Ameriflight. I didn't even think twice about, well, somebody had to go do that and put that together. And here you are talking about it. That's interesting. You've always had kind words about Siemens tools. Now that you are building a prototype, are there areas where you see Siemens can help you in the future?
Obviously, we have the basic tool set right now, which is a great place for the company. But we see opportunities as well as we're talking to customers, specifically on the sustainability side. So we recently were talking with an investor who ended up putting in money, but one of their big requirements for us was understanding how we are thinking about sustainability decisions when we do a trade study, whether it be for materials or things like that. And as well as how do we actually capture the overall CO2 or sustainability aspect in our entire product. And so I know I had a couple of conversations with your team, but there's reporting tools now and like trade study tools that you guys are working towards that have those types of pieces inside of them. Obviously, when we started this whole company, we really didn't think too much about it, but those are the pieces that our customers care about, our investors now care about, and obviously as engineers, we have to, and we do care, but I have to start thinking more how to implement. And of course, the PLM system, making sure everything is integrating directly through the entire process. Obviously, we're in a rapid prototyping environment today, but that's going to change really quickly. And so having those conversations on the FAA side, making sure there's traceability between parts, all the way from the engineering analysis, all the way down to the manufacturing floor is very, very important to us. And so I think what's really cool about Siemens is that it's almost like a one-stop shop. Instead of me trying to bring in a couple of all these tools together and try to piecewise them together, Siemens has the opportunity to really be the whole entire thing for a company our size at the earlier stages, as well as through the growth. And then finally, when we hit, IPO, mega production, take over the world type of mentality. So I guess that's the really cool part is you can definitely grow within the suite and as a partner with you guys.
I would suspect that you do hope to one day, or you do plan to one day, be a one-stop shop. I'm going to take the phrase that you just used, one-stop shop to design, engineer, and manufacture your cargo aircraft, right?
Absolutely. And, we were talking with some of your folks that were recently brought in about digital factories. Well, we haven't even thought about a digital factory, what that might look like, but I never knew that Siemens had a dedicated division for something like that, where it's more of I wouldn't say it's a consultant type of relationship, but, it's more of a team joint effort where we're not doing we leverage both of our expertise to really figure out what a digital factory might look like. I love those types of conversations. And then again, there's many different facets of Siemens as well. Obviously you have the financial arm, infrastructure arm as well. And then now you have the software tools, and now you're bringing in digital factories. So it's been a very interesting and I would say very fruitful partnership for us as a company.
Oh, that's great to hear. Let's fast forward 2 years, and you're once again joining our podcast. What kinds of things would you hope to be sharing with us at that point?
I would probably hope to be sharing a video for a slide of our full-scale prototype. I cannot be more excited about that. I mean, it would be the world's largest commercial drone in existence, the world's first blended wing body design. And then there's so many firsts with that airplane. And so just getting it to see in scale, 85-foot scale and on gear and in the air is going to be probably the highlight of that conversation. And I'm sure I would have many more lessons learned over the last 2 years that things that I don't know that are coming up in the future as well. So yeah, and then after that, hopefully I'll be able to be more public about our customers as well. So that'll be really exciting. We're working with a lot of really forward-thinking folks, and I think they see that the industry is definitely ripe for change. And so having a startup who's a little bit more nimble that is able to listen to them and get to market is going to be fantastic. We're going to change the world. I'm excited for it.
As are we. I'm also aware that your personal life has taken a change. You have someone new in your family. So is that something you're willing to chat about and talk about?
Yeah, my wife and I recently celebrated the birth of our son. He's a little over a year old. And so it's been an exciting and interesting journey from the family life perspective too, is learning how to become a father as well as, a founder and CEO and leader and try to balance work life together. Funny story on that too is my co-founder also had a daughter around 2 weeks before us. And so I was all excited about the news and I shared it with our investors. And one investor texted me, he's like, Alex, who the hell is running the company now? I was like, oh boy, yeah, that's a good question. Got to get back to that. I wouldn't say it's an easy way to build a company, but at the same time, it's very rewarding and I wouldn't change a thing.
Yeah. I can remember when I experienced the birth of our daughter, and it was definitely life-changing. So Alexei, in the last podcast, you gave a great piece of advice to other entrepreneurs, and I'll paraphrase. You said, they need to believe in what they're developing and show grit in making it happen. Do you have additional advice that you would give to entrepreneurs since 2021?
Actually, I think the grit stuff, as well as taking time off, it's something that I'm really bad at. But it's, I think, something that is becoming more and more apparent is if you're down in the trenches, especially surrounding VCs and all these roller coaster rides, the ups and the downs, it's really hard. I mean, it's really easy, I think, to become cynical. And the moment you become the first cynic within the company, especially in a leadership position, it echoes to not only the entire company, but also through your investors and then your customers as well. And so taking that time off and reflecting on, the positive things that you have achieved over the, last year or two or something like that, and understanding how you weather those storms, I think really helps create the right mindset to make sure that when you come back from that, you have a good, clean head looking towards the future, focusing on the positives while still understanding how to tackle some of the tougher problems.
Yeah, I have to admit, I'm one of those individuals who don't take a lot of time off either. And it's something that I have personally been trying to get better at. So I understand that completely. And I think that's really good advice. When you look back over the last 2 years, what are you most proud of when you think about Nautilus and the Nautilus team?
I think I'm really excited about the team that we've built around the core team right now. Obviously, as a company, you have to understand that, some hires will come and some hires will go. Sometimes it's not the best fit. Hiring is still one of the key problems, I think, within any startup. Where we are today is such a really good place. I'm really excited about who I work with on a daily basis. I'm excited to see all of us are growing every day. All of us are accomplishing really tough things. I mean, we spent 8 hours in the desert once, over the last week and a half, and it's a tough time. It's hot. People are working really hard, and you got to have that determination and really believe in the vision that when Silicon Valley Bank does go down, hopefully not again, but it's just the banking situation changes that they're willing to wait a week or two or until something, gets settled through and they do get paid. I think that leap of faith is what I call it, is something that I think all of us really have right now as a team. And I'm really excited to help grow that. And I think we'll be growing at a little bit slower pace, although I'm saying that we're going to be really ambitious, but making sure that we're good stewards of that culture.
I've done a bit of hiring in my past as well. And a lot of people think it's pretty easy or think it's a simple thing to do. It is not. It is not. It is tough. And it takes time. It really takes a lot of time. We are coming to the end of our time together today. But before we go, do you have any other thoughts or comments that you would like to share about yourself or Nautilus?
I think I just have advice to other fellow entrepreneurs is go build something. This is a really good time to get funding. So I'm excited to see what will happen over the next 6 to 8 months and what companies really evolve out of this. I guess I would say turn of the markets, but it's such an awesome opportunity that I think people should be really thinking about that as an option.
We talked about the funding and the funding being available for those early stage. So that's neat. Well, Alexei, I'd like to thank you for joining this conversation.
Thank you so much, Kevin. It's been such a pleasure to always talk to you.
Well, it has been a pleasure talking with you as well. And I'm so excited about how far you have come with the Nautilus team. Growth in personnel, 3x times, growth in your physical footprint, building a full-scale prototype and meeting those goals, getting the additional funding, manufacturing that. Again, I'll go back to that. Manufacturing a full-scale prototype with 20 to 30 people and then $7 billion book order. That's amazing. And then the fact that you're now looking at multiple products as opposed to a single product. It's been an amazing 2 years. I can't wait to see the full-scale prototype plane fly. And I hope you invite us out to that maiden flight.
Of course, Kevin. Thank you so much.
For our listeners, if you want to know more about Nautilus or how they are reinventing the global air freight side of the business, or perhaps you are interested in joining an incredibly talented team. When I say incredibly talented, they're talented, motivated, and passionate about the products that they are developing and building. And they are hiring. So if you're interested, you can go to their website at www.nautilus.co. I also want to thank everyone for listening to today's podcast. It's been great hearing about Nautilus and all the changes that have occurred. And I'm excited to see what happens over the next 2 years. As a reminder, Siemens does offer special packaging and pricing for small and medium-sized startup companies, nearly all areas of the software portfolio. If you would like to know more, please visit the Siemens website at www.siemens.com /software for startups or speak with any of the Siemens partners. Thanks again for listening to the Siemens Startup Podcast. Please feel free to provide comments on this episode by leaving a review in your favorite podcast site or email me at kevin.blevins@siemens.com. This is your host, Kevin Blevins. Remember, innovation has no boundaries.